Welcome back to another Algebra Tips and Tricks. What we're going to look at today isn't really an algebra issue. It's really kind of a pre-algebra issue, but I find that a lot of students don't have this down, or they're struggling to kind of memorize this pattern. And so this is absolutely necessary to be a successful algebra student. We're going to look at multiplying positive and negative numbers. In the way that you were probably taught this, was to think of like the patterns. Like you memorize that a negative times a positive equals a negative. So I've got a positive 7 times a negative 3. So I'm memorizing, okay, a positive number times a negative number equals a negative number. And then down here, a negative number times a negative number, what does that equal? It equals a positive number. Now, that's true. But let's look at it in a little better way that I hope will give you a little deeper understanding of what's happening. So this is the kind of way that we teach this, basically the memorizing what kind of numbers you have and what the output is. And you may have learned it totally fine and this has worked for you, but for a lot of people it doesn't. So let me show you a little bit better what's happening. What's really going on here, or a real convenient way to understand this at a deeper level, is something called the multiplication, or the commutative property of multiplication. And what that means is its fancy name. All it means is it doesn't matter the order which you multiply. I can multiply 3 times 4 times 5, or 4 times 5 times 3, or 5 times 3 times 4, and I think you'd agree we're going to get the same thing every time. So how does this help us when we are working with multiplying positive and negative numbers? Well, I want you to think of the signs, positive signs or negative signs, as their own individual signs. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move them to the front. So this is like negative times 5 times 6. I'm going to just move the negative to the front. Now it's already in this one, happens to be there. That's fine. Now I'm just going to multiply the numbers. This, I know, 5 times 6 is 30, and there's a negative in the front. Okay, that's easy. Now, let's look at another one. I've got 7 times negative 3. Because we can multiply in any order, this is really like 7 times negative times 3. I can multiply in any order. I'm going to multiply the negative in the front. I'm going to just move him around. The commutative property of multiplication says I can multiply that negative in any order. I'm going to put him in the front. Now look at your numbers. 7 times 3 is 21. I've got a negative in the front, so I have negative 21. Now look what happens when we have doubles here. I'm going to move all the signs to the front. So it's not really just like negative 6, it's negative times 6, so negative times 4. So I'm moving all the signs up to the beginning. Now let's just look at the numbers. I know 6 times 4 is 24. Now, what about the numbers? Well, negatives are also as a fancy way of saying the opposite. Negative 30 is really the opposite of 30. Negative 21 is the opposite of 21. And so what would happen here? I've got two negatives now in the front. Well, it's the opposite of an opposite. Well, what's the opposite of opposite? Gets us right back to where we started. So what I'm suggesting here is that the way we think of signs allows us to just move them to the front. Using that commutative property of multiplication, slide all of them to the front, multiply the numbers just as you would. And if you're not sure, so if you have one sign, there's nothing to worry about. If you have two, the reasoning here is the opposite of an opposite gets me back to where I started, gets me a positive. Okay, now let's look at 30 divided by negative 5. So what if we're doing division? Well, we're going to do the same trick. I'm going to move the sign out to the front. I know 30 divided by 5 is 6. There's just a negative sign there. I just put him back in the front. How about negative 81 divided by negative 9? I'm going to move the signs to the front. Now there's two of them out there. I'm going to worry about the numbers. 81 divided by 9 is 9. Now the opposite of an opposite is a positive, but we don't have to show the positive. We know it's there if we don't write it. So what I'm saying again, even on division, move all the signs in the front, deal with the numbers, and if you've got a negative times a negative, well, the opposite of an opposite goes right back to where you began. All right, now let's look at one here that has 3 different numbers. They're all negatives. I'm going to just move them all to the front. All the negatives went in the front. Now, I know if I do the numbers, I get 60. And you could do this here too. I showed this in 2 steps, but if you had the opposite of an opposite of an opposite, if you think that through, you're going to be back to a negative here. But so you could do it in 2 steps. The opposite of an opposite makes a positive. I've got another negative left. Now a positive and a negative. So what is the opposite of a positive? It's negative 60. So one more time, I moved all the signs in front. I just tackled the numbers. And I think maybe it's easier to go from this first step to the last one. An opposite of an opposite would be a positive. And then another opposite is going to end up being negative. So just think the logic of that through until you get to the end. The opposite of an opposite of an opposite would wind up being a negative number. Okay, I hope that helps. It is really foundational. You've got to have this skill in order to be a successful algebra student. Again, my tip here is move all the signs to the front, deal with the number, and then just take a look at the signs last. If you found this video helpful, check out my workbook, Learn by Doing Algebra Essentials, filled with all of my algebra tips and tricks. I designed it for college students who needed some repair to their algebra foundation, but I think you'll find this helpful for any algebra course that you're taking. Or for some help getting through an entire course, check out my other Learn by Doing workbooks. They're essentially like having a tutor in a book.